Right guys, so carrying on from the previous lesson, we're looking today at paper and board, but again it's from Unit 4, so it's about materials and their working properties. It's just some obviously paper and boards that you would be expected to know for the core section of the exam. Now the exam expectations are the same in terms of materials, it's just changes for paper and board. So it's just that you know the primary sources of materials, so where paper and board come from. You're able to recognise and characterise the different types of paper and board. So it's known that papers, when we're talking about them, are copier paper, cartridge paper, tracing paper, and then the other category are boards, and the ones that we need to know are folding box board, solid whiteboard and corrugated board. And again, just understanding what the physical and working properties of those papers and boards are. And just to recap, obviously physical properties are the physical properties they possess, and then the working properties are how they perform in the general life of the product. Now paper come from different sources of cellulose fibres. So that's generally, it could be wood, cotton, flax, straw, hemp or sugarcane, as you can see pictured there. In the simplest of forms, basically they are pressed together with water, then dried. But often you need different textures or different surface finishes, so chemicals can be added during the process. So for example, that might be brightening bleaches, which is often used on copier paper, on solid whiteboard to get that really bright white finish, which is often needed for printing on. Now, as in all materials, they come in what we call a stock form. Now, a stock form is basically a standard form or size that all materials come in. Reason for this is so that it can be transported and handled more easily than the raw materials. It means they're cheaper because obviously they can be produced in large quantities to the standard size, whereas if you want a specific size, it costs a lot more. They're readily available. Often you should be able to just order them and they come quite quickly because they've got a large stock of them. And they're the same in most countries, so that means we have an international standard, so you can obviously order from across the world and it will be the same size. When we're talking about stock form for papers and card, we have an international standard, and the common stock forms that come in, for example, might be the types, so like sheet, roll or ply. Obviously sheet's the most standard that we use within school, but roll is when we're talking about on large printing runs. They would buy it obviously on a roll and then it just gets cut as it goes down. Then size is obviously quite straightforward. You've got A4, A3 and so on. Stock form can also be the colour, so there might be certain colours for each certain papers. And then also when we're talking about stock form, we also mean the weight and thickness. And generally for papers, that is what we call GSM. Now, papers that we need to know are, as I've already said, copier paper, cartridge paper and tracing paper. And it might just be handy as we're going through just to kind of mind map some of the notes as I'm going along. But we'll start with copier paper. I mean, obviously we know this and we use it regularly in school. And the reason being for that is obviously because it's quite thin, it's lightweight, it's cheap, and it's got a bright white surface because it's been bleached during the process. See, we use it generally for drawing, it can be used for printing and photocopying. And main reason that is it takes colour really well, so obviously during printing it takes the colour from the printing ink well. It's a good surface area for pencils, pens and markers, but I would say that it also can, with some markers, have a tendency to leak a little bit or bleed from outside your lines. So sometimes designers, if they don't want obviously that bleed, tend to buy some other paper, such as layout paper, for example. It's also very cheap and readily available. Its disadvantage though is it is prone to jamming in the printer feed because it's so thin. So whilst it's alright for like obviously odd printing out in school, it's not really appropriate for larger runs. So it's a thicker paper. Obviously, paper is generally used in industry. Now, cartridge paper, if you remember back to when you did art, for example, and the sketchbooks that you had would have had cartridge paper inside them. And it's quite, obviously, it's creamy, so it's unbleached, and it's quite thick and heavyweight. And that allows it, obviously, take a lot of media. So it accepts watercolour paint, for example, very well because it doesn't buckle or it doesn't warp underneath it. It accepts, you know, it is a really good surface area for any kind of drawing media, and because it's opaque it means you don't see it through the other side. One of the disadvantages though is it does cost more than copier paper, so generally you would use cartridge paper for more presentation, whereas your copier paper would be used for more quick sketches. And then tracing paper, I like to think you know what that looks like, but tracing paper, as you know, it's quite thin, it's got a very smooth surface area and it's translucent. And it's generally obviously used obviously in art for making copies. So it allows you, obviously, if you have made a drawing, you can easily make a copy over the top and then transfer it, which allows for really quite quick sketches often. So if a designer is obviously developing their sketches, then tracing paper is heavily used for that. It's also used for envelope windows, and often also overlays on working drawings to actually protect the drawings. Or it allows you, if for example they want to show different areas, to have the working drawing underneath, and then they can have another sketch over the top on the overlay, and it just allows you to see that obviously the working drawing underneath with the overlay on top. Obviously the advantage is it's quite strong paper and it's translucent, but it can be expensive, and obviously it's limited ink exhaustion, so you have to really think about what media you're using when you're using tracing paper, because some things such as fine liners have quite a long drying time. So you know, if you've actually drawn with a fine liner onto your tracing paper, you leave it quite some time, otherwise it'll just be easy smudge with one touch. Now, to give you an idea, obviously, how you might get this come up in an exam question, it can be very similar to the example I showed you on the last slide, where you might have the table at the beginning. But in terms of in the, after that initial question in the core section, might be like the example shown here. So again, as I alluded to last time, it comes in the form of topics. So at the beginning of the question, you will be presented with a figure like here. So you can see we've got a figure. So it's a drawing of a fabric play cube. So this is like the prototype of a play cube that would be used for young children, okay? During the process, the designer have used tracing paper to design the prototype play cube. So what the exam question is asking you is, could you explain one reason why designers use tracing paper? So you can see again, it's asked for one reason. So we want to give one reason. It's 2 marks. So that means that you've got to justify that reason. So I want you to have a little think about that. Pause the PowerPoint for a moment, and then on the next slide, we'll go through the question. Okay, so hopefully you've had some time to actually go through the question and have a go. So again, what the example was expecting is that it's one reason that includes, so it's got to be an accurate statement about why designers would use tracing paper. So that would be 1 mark. So that's one property, and then you link justification gets you the other mark. So generally, if we see for the examples here, we've got, it's either, you could have said it's either transparent, translucent, or see-through. You'd get 1 mark for that. It means it can be placed over a drawing and drawn on to make a copy of the drawing. Or you could have said traced, it allows it, it's transparent or see-through, which allows you to trace the image. Or it could have also been so you could see the pattern of the fabric underneath. The other answer the exam board would have taken was it can be placed over a drawing and drawn on, which means it can be used to transfer images, it could be used as an overlay, used to be written or drawn on to provide additional information or detail, and that's where you would get your other mark. So now we're going to go on to boards. So again, if you want to during this, make some notes, do a little mind map. But as I said at the beginning, the main boards that you need to know, so there's many others, is folding box board, corrugated board and solid whiteboard. As I said earlier, papers come in GSM, and any paper that weighs more than 220 GSM is then classified as a board. And then a board's thickness is measured in microns, which is basically 1,000th of a millimetre. So a 2-ply board would be 200 microns thick. So if we look at folding box board. Now this is one you probably see quite a lot in everyday life, because what you can see here, it basically consists of layers. We've got one layer, which is your printable bleach version. So if you look at the first example on the right, so you've got very white surface there. So that's been bleached, so it allows it to be printed on easily. So if you look at the examples of the serial boards there, it means they can print the graphics on. But then the other layer underneath is obviously an unbleached layer. So that is, as you can see, that kind of coming through there. So it's used for cereal boxes and other food and healthcare packaging because it can be easily bent or easily scored, so it allows you to get all those different folds. If you think of the cereal box, where you've obviously got your little fold tabs to obviously allow you to seal the box back up, it allows for that. It's got that lovely white surface, so it takes the print well. But because it's got the unbleached underneath, which is obviously a bit cheaper to not bleach it, means it's inexpensive. However, its disadvantages, it's a bit lower in strength than, for example, solid whiteboard that we're going to look at next. So again, this might be a good one if you've looked at your investigation work, if you are thinking of doing packaging as part of your looking at how to educate or encourage people to use and to eat healthily. If you're doing packaging, generally within supermarkets as well, they would generally use folding box board because it is that bit cheaper but allows you to print graphics on nicely. Then corrugated board, I think you know what this looks like, but basically it's got 2 or more layers of fluted paper and that is sandwiched between the 2 paper liners. This allows it to be quite impact resistant because obviously the fluted paper in between kind of takes the impact. So it's often used for a lot of protective packaging, for example, electrical products. And as you can see, generally it's used, so you can see there, a lot of Amazon packaging, even down to just the smaller packaging that they send out through the post will be made from corrugated board because it is impact resistant. I mean, things aren't going to get damaged. It's inexpensive because there's been no chemical or bleaching processes during the manufacture. And because of that, it's also very easily recyclable. The disadvantages, however, is obviously the brown finish doesn't really convey quality, so which is why it is just generally used for packaging and moving things around, but it wouldn't be what you would actually see on a, like for example, on a shelf in the shop. And it's not very water resistant. I'm sure some of you have seen this happen if any recycling's been left outside, and it can, under extreme pressure, it can then deform and misshape. Then solid whiteboard is quite a strong and rigid board, so it's made from pure bleached wood pulp. So chemical processes, obviously during that process, means that both sides of solid whiteboard are completely white, so it means you can print on both sides. It's often used, for example, book covers, food, cosmetics. So you can see from the examples there, obviously there are other takeaways and phone manufacturers available, but as you can see from those, just some of the uses. So you can see obviously on McDonald's fries, it allows them to obviously have a pattern on the inside as well, and because it's strong and rigid, it's going to obviously withhold obviously the food. You can to be honest, in a lot of takeaway packaging they tend to use solid whiteboard because whilst folding box board is used for food packaging. You need some obviously other properties for takeaways because it needs to be strong and it needs to be obviously hold the food against the heat as well as grease. So solid whiteboard's a lot more appropriate for when it comes to takeaway. Obviously it also allows them to put all their branding on. It also looks a little bit more luxurious, which is why it's often used for a lot of different phone manufacturers. Like for example, you can see on the iPhone there, it just looks a little bit more luxurious than, for example, a folding box board, and obviously it's a lot stronger as well. And then it's also quite rigid, so as you can see on the last example, you can see there we've got the aluminium foil tray. So the solid whiteboard insert means it means you can easily fold the tray around and it's quite rigid and it's not going to warp. But the only other thing is it's a little bit more expensive than folding box board. So in summary, guys, obviously different papers and boards have different types of structures and properties depending on the way they're made up. A lot of, however, have physical properties such as flexibility, which obviously can affect the quality of the finished product. So when designers are looking to use papers, it's looking at making sure that obviously they have the properties that they need for presenting their drawings and what's appropriate for that. When it comes to boards, they're looking at properties that it might have that obviously allows them to put branding and packaging on. And again, obviously thinking about the purpose, what do they need it to do? And sometimes obviously they need to think about obviously cost as part of that. And now we're just going to have another go on an exam question. So I'm going to talk you through it again, and then again, if you want to pause it, have a little go at doing the question, and then we'll go through it together. So you can see here on this particular question, it shows an aluminium foil takeaway container, like what we've just looked at, and then we've got this solid whiteboard lid. So using the knowledge of what we've just went through, it's asking you to explain again one advantage of using solid whiteboard for the lid. So think about, why do we use solid whiteboard? Give one property of it, that is a working property of solid whiteboard, and justify why that property makes it suitable for the aluminium foil tray to have the lid in it. And then if you pause it now, and then we'll go through the answers. So again, the exam board, it's one explanation and one link justification. So one example, so it could be excellent surface finish, you'd get 1 mark for that. And then the other mark comes from justification, that means it can be printed on or branded with the company's logo. It can be coated or have a foil back applied to it, which means the heat will be reflected or retained within the food. It is quite rigid or stiff material, which means the foil container can be easily folded down onto it over the lid without any bending or any flexing, or it retains its shape. And the last one, I doubt you would have gotten this one because obviously it's not a process we covered, but the exam board would have also accepted it can be die cut in bulk, so that's just obviously a manufacturing process, and that then it reduces the cost.